good, guys? So in this video I'm going to be breaking down one of my favorite samples I've made recently. There's almost 30 different instrument tracks in this project, and a lot of them are different layers and textures and just ambiances that add so much to it. I've also got a section that completely changes pitch and tempo, so I can't wait to break this down. This is one of my more complex and detailed samples. I'm going to show you exactly how and why I did what I did, going over all the different plugins I used, the different VSTs, etc. So let's get into it. This sample is called PRISM. It's from my upcoming sample pack called EQUINOX, and this is what the intro sounds like. There's a big change that happens there, but let's break down this first section. So the main sound is this synth. Goes up. Now, this synth was a Diva preset that I used called IW Jupiter Synth Brass 4. This has quickly become one of my favorite synth sounds within Diva, and it's from the Ingo Widener preset bank. And the plugins I used was the Valhalla Supermassive Reverb with quite a high mix, so there's a lot of reverb on this. I also added some EQ to tidy up some of the highs and the lows, especially after the reverb, and just some stock Logic compression. And this is the pattern that I played. So a very large and atmospheric synth, and the synth bass that I used is called Bassman. It's from Gingold, and what I used was a bit of the FabFilter Saturn just to get a little bit of compression and saturation. I added some EQ, which I really just cut out some of the frequencies where I have a lot of the other tracks playing, so it just created a bit of a duck, and then doing the same thing with a multi-band compressor. Multi-band compression is such a hack for achieving quality and detail in your samples or your tracks, because what I'm doing is almost side chaining and ducking and boosting the opposite to the other tracks, so everything kind of fills its own space. And this was the pattern that I played. Super simple. Bit of variation, and yeah, super simple. The next sound that I have, which really comes in throughout this sample, is this xylophone hit, and all I did was added some of this UAD AE compression. I added some EQ, just cutting out a lot of the highs, a lot of the lows, and it sounds like this. And the next texture I used is just this swell sound from one of the synths, which I just chopped out and then I'd reversed it. And I like doing this often if I have a main synth melody, just chopping a small section of it, usually from the end, and just reversing it and just having that come in every now and then. So it sounds like this. So all I added was the tape delay just so that it would, you know, carry over and just give it a nice ambient texture. Now we've got 4 new textures that are coming in. The main one here is a synth layer, which you can hear comes in a little bit early, just as a nice transition to coming in fully. And this high synth layer texture that I added on top is the PD Sunset Dreams. It's from Tom Wolf's Atlantis preset bank, and all I did was added some stock compression and again quite a lot of reverb, and this is the pattern that it played. along with the other synth, it just helped create some tension and crescendo into what is the next section of the sample. And you can hear just having these little stops on the main synth just helps give this texture room to breathe and just some interesting dynamic between them going back and forth. So that was a very crucial texture that I added. When I bounced it out, I just added some multi-band compression. As you can see, quite opposite to what I'd had previously on the multi-band compressor, just ducking some of these mid highs and boosting the highs, and that just helps it sit in its own space at the top. I added more of the UAD Rev A compressor, and I added some pancake just to give it some panning so that it was kind of taking up its own space and leaving that main synth as the kind of meat in the middle. And that's just a really nice mid-range kind of cassette synth sound, just helps keep that rhythm. And then again, I've got the same swells playing. So these swells were from that cassette synth sound, which again are just reversed. I have the xylophone playing. Then I have this static layer, which is very subtle, and it sounds like this. This important transition part, I have these two layers which sound like this together. So this transitions very nicely into the next section, and these were just two sounds that I got from Splice, which I sound shifted just to get it to match the key of this project. I added Emergence, which is kind of a guitar pedal type emulation, which just helps add some granular texture and kind of a delay. Added some RC20 with quite a high mix and panning the width all the way towards mono and being very close sounding because I wanted it to sound like a real life kind of vinyl click that was happening. And then just some EQ to cut out all the lows and focus on the highs, and then this static texture which sounds like this. So it's just kind of like a vinyl-y scratch, which again sound shifted quite low, almost an octave lower, just to match what I thought sounded good. And then I added the Cymatics Origin plugin, which I love, just for achieving more of a tape vinyl-y texture, again cutting out a lot of the highs. So this is what those textures sound like in context to the sample transitioning into the next section. Now, if you know the sample maker, producer, artist, London Rain, he definitely has been a big inspiration to me in recent months, and I think it shows a lot in this section. So it's important to note that I've got the master track here, and what I've done is use Sound Shifter by Waves just to pitch it down 3 semitones, and so you get this nice transition. And now that's along with the tempo change as well, so it goes from 72 beats per minute to 65, and that transition again. So it just brings a much darker atmospheric tone. To start with, we've got this Waves Crate texture, which sounds like this. So almost like a guitar kind of texture, and without any plugins, it sounds like this. So what I did was pitch it up 4 semitones so it matched the sample, and then I pitched it up another octave. I added the UAD Pultec EQ and some tape delay, which is just the stock Logic one. I added some stock stereo delay and some EQ, just cutting out a lot of the highs, a lot of the lows. And on this bus 11, which I do use a lot, it's just the Tal Chorus plugin, which just helps widen and bring more width to the samples or the sound, the bus, just cutting out the lows because I don't want to widen the lows. It tends to create quite a muddy mix. And the next important sound I have is this pad, which comes from Scorch. And just utilizing these kinds of stops typically at the end of the bar just help add that kind of chopped vintage sound. And that organ pad is just a preset from Scorch. It's called Moi, and it's got some stock compression. I've got the Cymatics Origin again, just for that tape kind of vinyl-y effect. And again, the UAD compression. And this was the pattern that I played. So I bounced that out, and then I added again more multi-band compression, just ducking the lows where obviously I have that synth bass coming in, so it just gives the bass more space, and just boosting some of the highs. And what I've done when I've boosted the highs as well is use the expand, not the compress. So this is just widening those high-end frequencies, and then I've got some EQ just cutting out all the lows. And again, I've just got that xylophone hit coming in. One of the most important layers, or 3 layers I have here, is this vocal, and I'll be honest, I just took this from Splice, which I try to avoid using Splice just for copyright reasons because people will upload these sounds as their own. So I would be wary of using Splice in your samples. If you do, I would chop and flip them a lot if you can, which I definitely try to do here. So when I chopped this vocal, this is what it sounded like. It's kind of a Brazilian funk vocal. So it's definitely not the kind of vocal you think would match this kind of sample. And if anything, that's what I love being able to do as a sample maker, as a producer, is take sounds that you wouldn't really expect to work, but just through the power of processing and understanding how to sound design, you can make it work and get something really unique. So what I did was just sound shifted it down 6 semitones so it matched the key of the sample. I added this little altar boy, which is a super amazing plugin for vocals, mainly for the formant shift. So it helps almost just bring a lower kind of pitch to the vocal without actually pitching it. But yeah, look into formant shifting. It's really cool to do on vocals. And then I've added the FabFilter Saturn and just a bunch of reverb. You can see 64% mix, although I have it on a very short delay, so it does sound like a small room. Then I have this beep, which again I just got from Splice because I just wanted something that just cut through, so it sounds like this. So I just think that's so cool and just adds such a raw experimental touch to the sample. Not really much to say about it. It's just a beep sound that I took and I pitched it down 8, added some FabFilter Saturn. So there's like distortion. This is a guitar amp preset. And then I added, again, the same reverb, just with a lower mix. And I added the stock delay. I've taken the synth bass, but I've only used one of the notes just to give it some impact. And I love that. And then obviously we have this ARP, which is the bloop texture. This is from Lost Face, and I love this. Without any of the plugins, it sounds like this. So pretty similar, but again, sound shifted it up 7 semitones to match the project, added the UAD compressor, added some stock delay, and I added pancake, not with a very wide pan, but just to give it some movement. So it sounds like this. Super cool. And then I have this as well. So just a very short, subtle layer, and it just has some RC20 on it. Not much going on there. I can't remember where I got that from. I think it was from one of these texture kits. And yeah, so all together. And that last sound was just this vinyl crackle, again, just for transition. Super cool, super simple, and just adding little textures like that can do so much for your samples, especially just to create a more interesting experimental atmosphere. It's very different from just a lot of the normal samples you would hear typically in packs. And then yeah, this goes into the next section, which sounds like this. So obviously a few new elements here, the main thing being this lead, this wobbly lead as I called it. And this lead was from a preset called Koi in Z Cozy's Le Soleil bank. Super, super cool sound. And this was the pattern that I played. Incredibly complex pattern. Don't know how I came up with this. Insane. On a serious note though, something that I've mentioned before is just to have notes not play exactly on the grid. In fact, I don't think I ever quantize anything anymore in my samples because I want it to have that realistic sound. And I just added some stock Logic compressor. I added the Valhalla Supermassive reverb as always, and quite a lot of RC20, which you can hear this noise, which is this 8-bit sound. So there's a lot of noise in this sound. And you can hear how it's dropping out. Sorry, that noise carries over a lot. The dropouts here just make such a difference again to give it that realistic, like broken vintage sound. RC20 is just one of the most goated plugins ever, especially for sample making in my opinion. That was that layer, and I have this tremolo cassette thing, which again, so quite some harsh panning, and without any of the plugins it sounds like this. And just to preface, this first one is the same as the others, just reversed obviously. So just a very ambient texture, and sound shifted it, and I just pitched it up an entire octave, added halftime, and then I've got Portal, which I often use this one. It's the 4th shape pan just to give it this chop. Then I added a bunch of these UAD plugins. I think because I just recently got the UAD compression and EQ bundle, I've been messing with them a lot. I love the sound they give. But yeah, I just basically spammed these plugins on. Just some more EQ and then just more compression. So and you might have noticed I just have these xylophone hits doing these doubles every now and then. And then I've just taken the same vocal but chopped it so it sounds like this, and I'll play it with organ. A way to make your samples have more variation is just to take the same layer of something like this vocal and just chop it in the next section. So there's still that motif, there's still that similarity to earlier in the sample, but just in a different way. Again, just including more variation. So just keeping the static from earlier just helps maintain that kind of timbre, that texture that this sample has. And I've included even more static noise here, which just fades in. And you can hear it's panning, so I just sound shifted it, pitched it up 5 semitones, added the origin plugin, I added more RC20, so a lot of just staticky tape vintage sound, and that fourth shape pan again, and just with a lot of panning on this, so it's moving around, again, just keeping it very dynamic. And I've just got the same ARP texture, but this one is pitched up a whole octave. I added the UAD-A compressor, the stock delay, I've added pancake for a little bit of panning, and I've just EQ'd the lows out. But also here where you can see I've boosted, I've used the stereo placement on side, so it's mostly just boosting the sides, not the mids. If you can do this on your EQ, definitely experiment with it. It's another way of giving tracks their own space, because especially when you have a lot of frequencies in the same range, one of the next best things to do is to either sidechain or just pan things to different spaces. And then transitioning into the next section. And I love this section because it kind of just gives you a chance to breathe, but also it introduces these drums, which just gives it rhythm and drive. So it kind of picks up a little bit again. And just a way to make it sound interesting is not to have the drums just come in on the one every single time. Now, although I've chopped it here, you still hear it playing. That's just because the halftime that I have on it. So I've pitched it down 3 semitones to match the key, and I've added the halftime. I almost always use this sort of halftime preset using percussive elements. I've got the cymatics origin just to make it more vintagey sounding. Cut out the lows, just got a bit of reverb on it with a small delay so it sounds like a small room. And the drums came from Sapir, one of his kits. Just an awesome drum break. And then the last layer that's introduced is this phrase from Keon, and it sounds like this. It's just a very textural layer, again, with that kind of like underwater sound, which just gives it that depth. Added some stock compression, added some halftime, which I've excluded the highs, brought down the mix, and some EQ, just cutting out the highs, the lows, keeping it very mid-focused. I've pitched it down to so it matches the key, added the UAD Rev E compressor, added the Pultec EQ, and then I've got this spectral gate, and the way it transitions into the last bit, the outro, sounds like this, and you're going to hear this vocal again which comes in. Such a dope outro in my opinion. I took that same phrase from Keon, except I've just like let the highs ring out now on the EQ. I've got the synth bass again playing, and the vocals come back in with the beep, and then all I did was just include this ARP, which is this meat texture from Lost Face, and without any of the plugins and not reversed, it sounds like this. So just a really cool ARP sound. And then I just pitched it down to match the project. I added the FabFilter Saturn with the guitar amp preset, added the UAD Rev A compressor, added Pancake, not too much panning going on, and a 59% mix to be specific, and added a lot of reverb to this with a small room. Added the Portal fourth shape pan, again just a little bit of panning just to give it that quarter note chop feel. Added more UAD EQ. I added this Portal preset called Arpomatic, which you can hear with and without. It sounds like this. So it just stops. With this it rings on and gives a lot of different artifacts. So it just gives it a lot more texture with all those artifacts that get introduced. And then just a multi-band compressor, actually just ducking some of the highs because they're quite harsh, especially after the Portal preset. And yeah, that's really the only difference. I've got those plucks that are only reversed now in the end. And then the last sound, which I like just to end this sample with, is the beep. And with the delay, it just sounds awesome. So yeah, that was my sample Prism. I really love this sample because it was one of the first times I've ever done a tempo change and a key change, and I just think it instantly elevated this sample into being something so interesting. And with all the little static textures that I've included, the distorted vocal, the beeps, it's something I want to experiment with more and improve my samples with. It's just using a lot of those ambient textures which aren't necessarily melodic, but just introduce a more human element, a more raw, ambient, dark, atmospheric feeling, and I just love what it's done for this sample. This sample was a big learning curve for me, and I just had so much fun making it. So just remember that when you are making your samples, you don't need to necessarily be super melodic and make it sound like a full-on song. You can learn how to introduce those human textures, those elements, even if it's just click sounds, if it's car noises, if it's beats, you know, just any kind of human ambience can just add so much depth and detail to your samples without it just being a piano and a synth bass and a guitar and a vocal. Again, like the vocals added a lot of distortion to the point where it's kind of jarring, but that makes the listener really feel something when they hear it. So hopefully you learned something from this breakdown. I had so much fun making it. Let me know what else you want to see. I've got some video ideas I want to make on just some of the best plugins that I use, free plugins as well, how I make my own textures and phrases. And yeah, there's a lot to come on this channel, and I can't wait to upload more. So yeah, thank you so much if you've made it this far, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.